All right. Well, hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our Fridays with Fiscal for June 2025. My name is Amanda. I'm going to be kicking us off this morning. We're doing it a little different today. We have a longer session planned. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about reports. I'm going to start off with talking about reports from the USAS side. And obviously, with reports, some things, some of the general things apply to both sides. I'm going to get into sort of some of the canned reports on the USAS side, talk about like template versus canned reports, kind of the overview that, we've done in some other trainings, but also take a look at some of our newer updates to canned reports and talk through that. And then we're going to talk about customization, and we're going to go kind of into the details a little bit more of the customization in the USAS portion. Then we'll switch over to Lori to talk about more USPS specific reports. And I believe she's going to kind of touch on customization there, as well as an extension because customization does apply to both sides in a very similar manner. So we thought it was kind of nice, especially with that piece to link these together. Um, that said, so I'm planning about an hour and a half this morning for the USAS side. We'll see as far as timing, we're kind of playing that a little bit by ear, but my general plan is about an hour and a half, and then we'll take a little break and we'll switch over to USPS. So that said, with it being a longer session like this, we are recording the session. So if you need to go at any point, the recording will be there. If you need to revisit it later, it's kind of difficult in June because there's so much going on. So we thought we'd try it this way because even though it's a longer session, at least it's like all on one day for you. So I'm kind of seeing how this goes. Okay, so let me see here. All right, where are we starting at? So that's like that's our general plan here. Okay, so with that, let me just hop right into USAS to get us started. Okay. Okay, so the first thing here, and I know I've talked about this on some trainings before, but I want to make sure to kind of like have this conversation while we're talking specifically about reports today. Just because it is something that comes up so much, and I'm going to use the term throughout the training. So just in case anybody isn't as familiar with some of the terminology, I want to make sure to kind of talk through what I mean. So really this is template reports versus canned reports. So I've mentioned these already with talking about the canned reports. And what I mean when I say template reports are going to be any of these reports that show on this homepage or in the report manager. And so these would be like kind of the same list of reports unless you have certain ones favorited on the main page. And for USAS especially, this is really relevant because when USAS, like in the earlier days of the redesigned USAS, pretty much all of the reports on the USAS side were started off as template reports. There were only a couple that really weren't in this template report area. The alternate to that is what we call canned reports, and those are any that show on this report drop-down menu. And really the difference here is, how the reports basically are set up. So any of these template reports, and I'm just going to let's click a random one here. Let's go in. If you click this eye icon on the report manager, and this is what we'll get into later, you can have this customized view where you can take any of these reports and make your own version of them. So any of those template reports, every single one of the template reports on the report manager grid has this behind the scenes setup, and it's all set up on this specific style. Like this is how each one is sort of configured in the background. Now, when we talk about the canned reports, here, let me get out of here because that's a lot to look at. When we talk about the canned reports, a lot of them like do look similar. Some of them are specifically set up to look similar, but these ones are programmed in a different way. And so really the difference here is with template reports, you kind of have the flexibility. You have that ability to go in and make tweaks to them and make your own version. You can customize, you can use that sort of report creator to pull different information from those grids and really set it up however you want, within the options that you have of the report creating. When it comes to the canned reports, what's nice there is that we have on the development side more ability to customize those reports for the specific thing they're for. So some of the options within the canned reports are a little bit more complex. We can have drop downs instead of like a field to type in. Um, we can set up certain columns that allow calculations in some way. And so there's a little bit more complexity that we can do. Formatting can change in a different way than the template reports can. And so, the benefit with those is that you get some of those other perks as far as how those reports are set up, what they can do, where the template reports is really the flexibility. That said, the other thing that we generally talk about this for is you'll notice that some of these reports, so we have budget summary, disbursement detail, financial detail report. You can see in the background here on my grid of the template reports, we have some of the same reports in both different formats, either template or canned. And the reason for that is that specifically these reports, they're ones that get used a lot. And because the template reports are so flexible to do anything, they're not necessarily specialized to do that one thing. And what we found is that, some of these have some pretty significant performance issues because of that, because they're just built on this, basic layout. And so a couple years ago, I believe, yeah, probably a couple years ago, maybe more at this point, we rewrote some of those template reports as canned reports specifically for the benefit of being able to program them exactly for what they need to do, which gives them a huge performance boost. So I know many of you have probably heard us say this a million times, but any of these reports that have a template version and a canned version, please, try and have your districts, try and suggest that your districts use the canned version whenever possible, because the canned versions are much, much quicker. Also, as we go forward with USAS, any of these reports that are rewritten as canned reports, our intention is really to have them be the replacement for the template version. Now we aren't getting rid of the template versions because we know that people have like their own versions of those, or they maybe use those for specific things, so we don't want to take those away. However, any like future updates to reports, we intend to, specifically the ones that have been rewritten as canned reports, we intend to make those to the canned version. If there are things that you come across in working with your districts where they are like, I have to use the template version because of XYZ, the canned version doesn't have this or doesn't do this. Those are things that we definitely want to know. The team has actively made several improvements over the last couple years to add things to like the Excel versions of the canned reports and certain things like that, so that these versions can be used instead whenever possible. So that's really where we're at with like canned versus template and kind of a little bit about the why. So let's see. Um Let me just make sure I got all my notes here before we dive in, because the first thing we're diving into is pretty exciting here. Okay. So let's take a look at one of these reports, and we're starting right off with looking at this financial detail report. This is one that was one of the replacement versions, so there are several flavors of a financial detail report available as a template version. But that was honestly, I think, one of the biggest performance improvements with any of these reports was the financial detail being rewritten into the canned version. And so this one especially, when we're talking a financial detail, that this is basically the transaction, like running list of all the transactions for whatever date range you put in. And generally, this one is used to compare to like fiscal to date figures. And so, especially when we are in June, if they're trying to run this report from July 1st of last year until June of this year, that could be a really large report, a lot of transactions. It generally is. And so if we're running it for an entire fiscal year, the canned version just so much quicker. So I think, that's something where we definitely want to make sure that this is available whenever possible. Let's do 24. So this report, it does require start and stop dates. That's one of the things that was with the canned version. It's able to do like required fields, and so you have to enter in the start and stop dates. Really, one of the main reasons I'm kicking off with this is because we have this new option for the running fund balance on the report. And so I want to kind of start us off with talking about looking at that running fund balance. And so let's do this for our general fund. And let me just go ahead and run this. We'll talk about, let's see what it looks like, and then we'll kind of come back and talk about that option there. So we recently added this in the last month, I believe. We added the running fund balance. This was something that was requested for a really long time because the classic version of the software had a running fund balance on the financial detail report, or at least an option to show it on there. It is something that is more complex. So it had to be on the canned version. So this is only available on the canned version of the report. And let's take a look at it here. Now, the first thing I want to point out here is that, so first of all, my dates that I ran it for is the fiscal year for this example. The running fund balance is only available when the start date of your report is either the first day of the current fiscal year or the first day of the current period. So this last column changes to running fund balance, this last column over here. And so that would only happen if my start date was 7/1 of 24, since I'm in fiscal year 25, or June 1st of 25. So either my current posting period, like my current month, or my current fiscal year. And the reason for that is because what the system needs to do is it pulls this header here. This is going to be the starting amount. And so for the fiscal year, that's the initial cash balance, and that's going to show in your header over here. So the number that it's starting with is coming based on that specific date. Now the starting balances are basically held on the account records, and so it needs somewhere to start in order to do the calculation. And so that's why, at least for now, it has to be on either the first of the fiscal year or the first of the current posting period. So if I were to put in like the second, then basically what this is going to do is it would show what it previously did, which was the encumbrances. Michelle, I see your question. I do have an answer to that that I'll get to in a second. So we'll answer that. Now this one, so it has these purchase order records. So let me just scroll down and get us to where we have some transactions. So we can see, you know what? Hang on. Let me do this. Let's run this actually for a fund, for a grant fund, so we can see a couple different ones instead of needing to scroll. So here we have, so again, here's the initial balance at the top here. Let me see if I can zoom in. So here is our starting balance, and then it would go through, and hang on, this is, we get cut off, something's odd here. Okay. Okay. I was looking at these yesterday and something's looking on here. So hang on, let's go back to this one. I just want to show you the basics, and then I do have a couple comments about some of these things that we're seeing with the scrolling. So give me a second here. Uh, all right. So basically here, when we look at like the basic idea is that when you have the received amount, it's going to like add any received amounts and subtract any expended amounts. And so as it goes, that's your general idea. So the other thing that I wanted to say here is let's do this first. So if I say 7/2, so if I'm not starting on the first day of a current period, what you'll notice is this unchecks, okay? And this basically we added this box like a release after we updated this because first of all, we had some districts that still wanted to see the remaining encumbrance instead of the running fund balance. And so even if it is, the first, then you could uncheck this and you could run it the old way. If there's a situation where the running fund balance isn't an option, it's going to automatically uncheck. They won't be able to check it. And this little tooltip tells you the option's not available for the selected date. So that is something, if you get questions on that, basically like when it doesn't apply, that's when it's going to become unchecked. And then it's got the little tip there. Let's see. So the next thing that I wanted to mention is Michelle's question. So because this works off of the headers, sorry, let me get back to my main page here. Because this works off of, so it has the header, it pulls in an amount for the initial amount, and that's something that's part of formatting. It's doing this calculation that's basically written into the formatting with this report. It is an option that only works with the PDF version. If you run it to Excel data, there is a column for the running fund balance, but it's not able to do the calculation in that like direct data output. It has the column there, so if you were to bring in, yourself, if you were to bring in the initial balance and then like add a calculation to that column, you could do that. But it's only going to actually be calculating the running fund balance in a PDF version, in like that formatted version of the report. The other question I have is if June's the current posting period, can it be run from 5/1 to 5/31 as the start and end dates to get the totals just for that month? So in that case, May would need to be the current period. So you could like temporarily change the current period. I believe, hang on, we can try this, but I believe you have to change it, but let's just double check. Is it 5/31? Yeah, let's do that. Sorry, my brain's 6:30. Because we had discussed with the team, also this option's brand new, so there are a couple of things that we're still talking about for future updates as well with this option. So I'm going to talk about a couple of those as well. But let me just double check this to make sure my recollection is right. So yeah, because so the as of period is something that we talked about looking into having, being able to impact this, but right now you would actually have to like go just temporarily change the current period to May, and then you would be able to run it for the May dates. Other than that, it is actually going to be whatever the current period is. So 6/1. Yeah, and I will say, I mean, and I know that this is something that districts have wanted for a long time, and this is something that we have, sort of like a workaround with using the report link that can be brought into Excel. That's still something they could use, but obviously with having the benefit of like the quick canned report, that can be helpful. So here's the 6/1. And then that has your starting balance. Actually, this was a good way to run it for the month. This is kind of what I was trying to show before. So here's your additions and removals there. So another question, can this be set up to run as a scheduled job with the filter each month? The treasurers generally send these reports out to the student activity advisors after they close the month. So yeah, if you did, that's a good question, Vicky. In theory, yes. I have to double check. I think maybe not at the moment though, because if I'm remembering correctly, we have a JIRA issue for these canned reports specifically because when you add them to a report bundle, the start date and the end date, they like if you were to enter like the starting like a P for the period, it picks the period when you configure the report. That does happen when you're setting up a bundle too, which I believe we had reported pretty recently and we had made a JIRA issue for. I'll make a note to add to that one for your question. But yeah, I think unfortunately no, just because of kind of that other bug where the canned report can't use like the date shortcuts right now. If you were to set them up like with the actual start and stop dates, then you could, but I know that's not, then you might as well run them manually. Okay. So let's see. Let me get to a couple other things I want to mention here. Okay. The other thing that I did want to mention, so, again, this is something where the team worked on this, got it added. There's a couple of things that we've talked about internally with this as well. We have another JIRA issue already for like additional enhancements after kind of looking over how Classic worked. But as always, like your feedback and your district's feedback, we want to take that into account, for like additional improvements as possible. So let us know, if there are things that you find with this. The basic idea is that, we know people really wanted the running fund balance, so we want to get it out there in, this first version, and then make like maybe some additional improvements later. The first thing that we discussed is obviously now that we have this running fund balance added instead of the remaining encumbrance, you notice all of these rows are purchase orders. So it doesn't change the running fund balance. And I know that looks a little odd in this version, but if you had a version where it was showing the remaining encumbrances, you'd have information there. So one thing that we have listed for like future improvements, we had it requested before, is the ability to, not show the purchase order records on here. So that's something that we've talked about as an option. Um, and then let's see. The other thing that I did notice in actually testing for this training, so it's on my list to discuss with the team, I noticed if you were to pull over like and do some control headers, like if you break this into object code groups, then the running fund balance, the subtotals don't seem to be correct. So that's something I have noted to discuss with the team. So right now I'd say mostly for like a full cash, like for a full cash account. This makes sense to run it. But I would be cautious with breaking it down into like further subheaders from there if they're using the running fund balance. So that's something to watch out for. Also something I'll be looking into a bit more as well. So okay. With that though, I do want to talk about a couple more things in the running fund balance here. And one of them is, being able to add those control headers. So if we were to say run this for the year 24, oh my gosh. And let's leave the running fund balance off for this one. I'm gonna do it for my grant fund again here. Now, let's say that, okay, so when I run that, actually, let me run this real quick and we'll see where we start here. Let me close some of my extra windows. So here's where we kind of start. We have, our header, we have all of the activity for each of these cash accounts, and then like as it, restarts to a new fund special cost center, it makes a new section here, and it sort of has the subtotal at the bottom for each of the different cash accounts. So one thing that may be helpful with this report and with other reports there, these options are here. So we just kind of want to review the sortable properties. We also refer to this as like dynamic sort. And so we're going to talk about customizing later, but one of the reasons that was pretty much like the most used reason that I had question that I can recall for customizing reports at the start was to change these headers, was to change the subtotals. And so along the way, we added these sortable properties, this dynamic sort option. It's on the canned reports. It's also available on template reports. And this kind of like allowed it prevented the need to customize in many of the situations that people had originally been customizing reports for. So an example of this, let's take our, let's do, what I had. Okay, let's do by object. And I would just drag this over here. And when I drag it over, I can check control break. And that would allow me to control break, which control break is like add another header, add a subtotal for each time that group changes. And so if I drag it over there, check control break, and then let's run this again and I'll show you what the difference is here. So now we have the header for the cash account, and then each time there is a different object switch, it's going to group those and it's going to have the subtotal and the header for each of those different options. So that kind of breaks it down and gets additional totals there. Again, this is another thing that is a formatting update. So it has, the headers and subtotals. That's a formatting thing. So this applies specifically when you're running a PDF. Also, the Excel, regular Excel, not data, is also formatted. So that would also show it. But that is important to note when setting things up with these control breaks, that it's a formatting thing, not a data change. So any like data, like if you think of Excel data, CSVs, like those are just raw data formats. With that said, there's also a summary report option. And when you use the summary report option, that specifically is taking out, so you have your headers and you have all the detail. The summary is always going to only show the headers and the subtotals, and it's going to not show the detail. So let me generate that one real quick. So that's sort of a simplified version of this report, removing those detail rows. The other thing you can do with this report and many others is at the very top here, there's this option that is a save and recall. Here, let me scroll back over so we can see the labels. Save and recall is the first one at the top here. And if there are different ways that they would maybe regularly run these reports, we could, well, here actually, in order to make one, you would click the blank. So just that first row that's blank, and then type in a name. As soon as you tab off of that, then you could save this up, and then it would show in the list to be able to pull later. And so when you click on one of these, it's going to populate any of those options that were selected the previous time that you had, run this when you saved it. And so if there are certain things that are run maybe like monthly or, quarterly, regularly, with different ways, that's sort of a quick way to be able to just save a list of, what you typically run, to easily pull later. This is an option that is like, it's a personal, like user account option. So me as a user, I have my save and recalls that I like to run, these reports this certain way. So that's not something that like any other user would see. That's not something that can be shared with other users. That's just like my personal, this is how I like to run reports. It's a way for me to save how I run them, basically. Okay, so that's the financial detail report. Let's switch over to also talk about the purchase order detail report. This is another one of our canned reports that had been rewritten. Um, so this was rewritten as a canned version. There are a couple different versions of the template reports that this is intended to replace. So there's like a purchase order detail report. There's also one that's called SSDT outstanding purchase orders. And that one specifically, so I know outstanding purchase orders are something that, they're trying to look up, especially this time of year. And uh basically that template report, the outstanding PO report, is one that I know takes quite a while. So if you can use this instead, hopefully that they can in most cases. This is, definitely more performant. Um, so with that, the first thing I want to talk about with the status, so all will be like all POs or all POs in, whatever like ranges I enter in. We have invoiceable and we have outstanding that we can use for this status. We get questions on this sometimes, like what's the difference between invoiceable and outstanding? So when we're talking about invoiceable, here, let me close a couple of these um, extra windows and let's go, I'm gonna just grab a tab here so we can look at um, an actual purchase order here. All right. So when I'm looking at a purchase order, I have this specific checkbox here for invoiceable. And if I pick my invoiceable status, that's specifically going to go look at any purchase orders right now that have this box checked. So is it invoiceable? Yes or no? Is this checked or not? That's basically what invoiceable would say. So if I pick invoiceable, it's only going to give me any POs that have that box checked. Okay. Now you might think, well, that means a PO is open, that means it's outstanding, right? So like the kind of still can be confusing what the difference is. Um, the first thing is to keep in mind that if I have a purchase order that I invoice, so say I invoice one of these in full, if I come in here and fill this invoice and post it, it is possible that if I fill it in full, so if I hang on, let me just do this. Let's do this. Let's fill it. Oops. So if I invoice this in full, and then let's go back to our purchase order grid. Is it this one I did? Yeah. So over here I can see I still have this amount is payable. So I made the invoice, I posted it. Because it was a full invoice, I can no longer invoice on this PO. So this is unchecked, it's not invoiceable. However, it still has a remaining encumbrance because right now that amount is sitting out there in payables, not yet posted to a disbursement. And so as soon as that gets posted to a disbursement, like that payable posting step, that is when the encumbrances actually come off the PO. That's when on the account, they change from an encumbrance to an expended amount. So just because this is no longer invoiceable, it doesn't necessarily mean that the encumbrances are not included on the account. And so when we're talking about that part of it, that could just be a small window. It depends on how they do their invoicing, like how long they might invoice before posting. It is possible that if you run this for invoiceable, it could rule out some encumbrances that maybe are still showing on the account, on the PO on the account. And so if they're running this and trying to balance to the encumbrances on their account codes, invoiceable doesn't always give the exact picture of that. So the other thing too is, again, this is a question of, is this checkbox checked right now? So when we look at outstanding then, Outstanding is going to show any remaining encumbrances. So this one it has a remaining amount, so that would be included because it's in this payables process, but it would still be able to reflect the remaining amount because that's outstanding. Um, now, uh, the other thing that's important with outstanding is that this filter takes into account the current period. So if I run this for outstanding, it's going to say what's outstanding as of June. If I do have a scenario where um, if I do have a scenario where I need to look back at a previous month and see the outstanding for a previous posting period, I could, again, it would require me to change the actual current posting period. I don't have to reopen, I just have to change the current posting period. But this outstanding status could see what was outstanding at a different point in time based on the current period. Invoiceable is always only looking at the checkbox as it exists now. So that's the other like difference with outstanding versus invoiceable. Okay. Um, let's run this. The other thing I want to do is run this to Excel. So, so this can be run to Excel data, and the reason I wanted to show this is because this is another thing that we recently updated. I heard some mixed reviews on this, but we went ahead and made a couple changes to help accommodate. But we started getting some requests where some districts are being asked for purchase order detail reports for like 5 years of data with like certain fields and stuff, and they're like public record requests that I think are from like a third party, that's like wanting I don't know, their data. Again, I've heard some mixed reviews on this, but we had some districts that had put in tickets about the purchase order detail report because they were being requested for these like huge date ranges to go run these reports for a lot of POs. And one thing that they were asking for on these on the Excel version of the reports is to have like the vendor number and the vendor name. The vendor was previously just this column where it shows the vendor number and name. We added the numbers separately. We didn't want to take away this current column in case people are using that, but this has the name in it. So it has number and name. And then also we added the unit price and quantity to this report. And and again, I think with these requests, you know, I I every district is a little bit different on how they handle their public records requests, what their views are on it. Some of them I've heard they're like, well, if it wasn't on there, like we wouldn't have had, we don't have to add it. Some districts were running customized versions of the template, which was taking forever because they felt like it was in the system and they had to produce it. So our solution was just, hey, we added a couple columns onto the Excel version of this report. If you have districts that are wanting to do this and want to have this information available on this, this allows them to now be able to use the canned version of the report instead of the template report if they are wanting to, run this. We also kind of figured, I mean, the unit price and quantity is also helpful. So that, it's not something that is unhelpful on the report. So if you get questions about that, that's new. That's available on there. And kind of just one of the, like I mentioned, if we hear situations where people are saying they have to use the template report instead of using these canned reports that run so much quicker, we want to accommodate whenever possible to make it so that these reports can be used instead. So, of course, if you all continue to hear about things like that, let us know, and we do our best to keep it updated. All right. Um, let's see. The other thing, before we move on from the purchase order report, So we've had some questions over time, and especially when like looking into encumbrance differences, which, encumbrances were something from the migration period that um, we're sort of all over the place, and everyone's, like did their best to get everything, set at the time. We've had a couple things that come up, from districts still that are related back to that migration period with their encumbrances. And so one question that we get sometimes is if you run this purchase order detail report for outstanding, and then you were to go run the template report, for the SSDT here, let me show it real quick since I keep mentioning it. Let me just show at least what it's called. This one right here, the SSDT Outstanding Purchase Orders Report. So, technically these should balance. I mean, if you're running each of them, if you're running the one for outstanding, if you're running this for outstanding, this should balance, and that should also balance to the remaining encumbrances, for the current period on a budget summary, on a cash summary. All three of those figures should balance. Sometimes they don't. And, in that case, that's when you can certainly, put in a ticket to us to help with those situations. But the main thing that I look at when that happens is this canned version of the purchase order detail report. The biggest difference, the first thing I try to identify is because again, these canned reports are programmed like a little bit smarter, they're a little bit more complex in what it's looking at. If there's ever a situation where there's a purchase order that is closed and has like a negative remaining encumbrance, it can rule it out and it doesn't include it. And so, but then the template version, this is like a very specific filter that's just like, is the remaining zero yes or no? And so sometimes this report includes things that this report does not. Now, generally, those things should not be there. Really, the only situation where that can happen is if it was something that happened from the migrations or from adjustments related to migrations. Um, this report, because it's like, is it zero, yes or no? That also generally matches to what is on the account, because if there's a purchase order that has some erroneous amount on it, that generally is also impacting the account. And so, just like kind of an explanation of like what you may see there, that's generally like what I'm looking for if I see something like this. Um, but yeah, so that's just something to keep in mind. That's kind of the explanation of like the starting point of why you might see that. Generally, if I run this outstanding purchase orders and it's different than my canned report, the very first thing that I would do is I would go look for this report. It's called Post Import Closed Purchase Orders with Remaining Balance. Oops. So this report was used or can be used to identify any purchase orders in that situation. You got to be careful with this one because it will also pull any like that are in that payables process that I mentioned earlier. But if you see current ones on this, it may just be fine. Not every single one that would ever pop up on this is an issue because it's kind of situational. It's not really intended to be run later on. But if you run this and there are old purchase orders, like with old dates on them, then that could be a good way to identify the issue. Again, if you come across this, we are more than happy to take a look at it with you. So put in a ticket, but sometimes you don't know, what you're looking for. And if you get, a question about those two reports being different, I just kind of wanted to mention like why that may happen so that you kind of have a starting point in mind if that ever comes up. The other thing is we do have a couple things with this report that we intend to clean up. We have seen some situations where, so generally the outstanding should not include any of these that have zeros on them, but there are some legacy situations where like see these old ones that have zeros, that we do have a zero issue to clean that up. There's also a situation here where some of these have like a positive and negative that net to zero. This likely was an account change, and we also have a juror issue to clean those up. So I know that those are inconvenient, but we, you know, intend for those to be cleaned up eventually. If you have like, especially these ones with the old dates, and if you have a district that has a, you know, a lot of those that they don't want to see, you could, generally outstanding, you don't have to put in a start date, but in order to get out those old ones, like you could put in a start date. So like I noticed those were like in 2013, 2014. So if I put in a start date of like 2015, then I wouldn't get any older than that. Generally I would go look at, you know, actually make sure that I'm not ruling out anything that shouldn't be ruled out. But yeah, that's where that's one thing you could look to do. If you have a district that wants to rule those out. Usually I can find like a hard line where it won't omit anything that it shouldn't. So maybe their migration date, that's another thing I check sometimes. So that can be sort of a workaround for that situation. Okay. Okay, so that's our purchase order detail report. I'm going to talk about one more canned report before we hop over to talking about customization. And this next one that I want to talk about is the account payable report. This one is a good one to look at, to talk about at this time of year in June, because the situation that this one, you know, generally is asked about is for transactions that happen around the end and start of the fiscal year. So let me actually jump to the wiki for this one. We're going to go to, if we look under the reports section, there is a section for canned reports here. And so this lists detail about all of these reports under the canned menu that we're talking about. Account payable report. And what I would say in here, honestly, I often reference this because I know, you know, one of the things is when you hop in here, it has this like reported date. And the explanation for this is right here. So it defaults to June 30th of the last fiscal year closed. You can change that. Generally, the fiscal year is what they are looking to run this for. And here's this: only items that have a received date prior to the date entered and a paid date after the date entered or have not yet been paid will be reported. So, for example, when determining payable amounts as of the end of the fiscal year, the date is set to June 30th. The report would then display any items that have been invoiced with a received date prior to June 30th, but have not been paid, or the paid date is after June 30th. And so when we're looking at this, okay, so let's do, I'm going to do 25 here because I know that I have like a certain report where we can kind of look at things on this list. And let me run this real quick so we can see what the report shows. And then I'll look at the invoices and I'll show you exactly where this is pulling these dates from. So if we look at this, and let me zoom in a little bit, because the columns that I want to see here are these three specifically. Actually, sorry, these three specifically. So first of all, we have invoice date. When that invoice is created, there's the invoice date at the top. That's the date that it hits the system as of. That's the invoice date. The received date is the one that is mentioned for this report. So, you know, it says the received date, right? The received date is on the invoice. It's on each individual invoice item. Okay, we'll take a look at that. I'll show you exactly where that is. And then the paid date is going to be the check date, right? And so what this report is looking at is if the received date is prior to the date entered. So in this case, the received date is in June, but the paid date is in July. So they're saying they received the item before the end of the fiscal year, but they paid for it in the new fiscal year. That's generally the situation that they're wanting to see. Okay, so let's go look at these invoices now. And so when we look at this, and here, this one, it's not the same one that we just looked at the report, but this is the invoice date at the top. So in this case, this one was actually invoiced with a July date. However, the receive date down here on each individual item is in June. And then the check was paid in July. And so this would show on the report because this receive date on the items um is before the date of the report. Okay. Now, here's the part where sometimes when we get questions about this report, districts will run it and it's blank. And it's because it is so important to keep tabs on that receive date. I'm invoicing a new purchase order now, okay? And so let's go put in my invoice number here. I could, say that this is 7/1, say, maybe we're like in July now. There's a vendor invoice date here, which some districts use. And then I'm zoomed in quite a bit here. Let me zoom out for a second. And then the receive date is down here on the item, okay? So I could fill this and the receive date. Now, I can manually key in my receive date. Okay, I could do that and say that it was received in June. If I leave this blank, which I think a lot of times they do, if I leave this blank and I save this, okay, it's giving me a warning. My receive date defaults to my invoice date, okay? And so if they, are intending to use these receive dates, if they want it to be different than the invoice date, then, generally they would want to type that in before saving. Another thing that we had some feedback on is that if they're using this vendor invoice date, they might want the vendor invoice date to be used for the receive date. There is a rule. It's not a default rule, but there's a rule that's out in the rules grid that you can access as the ITC. And so if that's something where they would want this to be the date that defaults instead, so that they don't have to manually enter these for this situation, you could enable that rule. And then it would have it so that when they save, this would default to the vendor invoice date instead of the invoice date. So that is something to check. If you have a district that's trying to run this report, this date down here is really what they want to pay attention to. And again, this is something I want to talk about at this time of year, because generally when they're running this report, they're like months after the fiscal year, and then they look back and these didn't have the receive dates that, really like they intended them to have. And so they won't show on the report because the report is specifically comparing those two dates. So I just wanted to kind of talk through that because that is a pretty big part of that one, and we do get some questions on it, and it is helpful to know in advance if they're intending to use that. Okay. Okay. So that wraps up what I'm planning to talk about with the canned reports. Let me close my extra windows again here. We're going to get into talking about customizing reports. And where we're going for that is to our report manager is where we're going to jump off of. Before we actually go there, let me talk about the custom report creator just briefly. So the first thing is talking about like when to customize reports is an important part of the conversation now, I think. And this is why, with starting out and talking about sort of like our template reports versus our canned reports, showing some of those options with the dynamic sort. And, in the early days of the USAS, or the redesigned USAS, I know there was a lot of report customization. And really, over time, we've tried to do our best to cut out some of those needs to customize so that either the template or the canned versions like can be used, and then you don't have to do a ton of customization. So kind of my list is like if you need to customize, I'm thinking things like add or removing fields from a report to customize, like adding or removing fields for like, the layout, that can be a good reason. Changing around kind of how the filters are set up, that can be a need to customize. Changing the headers and subtotals depends on the need because again, the dynamic sort can do that, but that is something that can be done in there. Um, and then the other thing that we'll talk about, which actually let's jump into the custom report creator and then I'll talk about that. So, just to cover this, we're doing a reports basics training. I, have to mention this, but I'll tell you, as I pretty much always do, I don't really ever use the custom report creator. I think that this is an option that's great to have, but it's also something where since we have so many of the template reports that you can start as a starting point from, I don't think that this really gets used that often, but it's here. So what this is, as I mentioned at the start, the template reports are all kind of based off of this like same building blocks of how the template reports are made. And the first important thing here is select object. So what these objects correspond to are different pieces within the software. So if I scroll down here, I can see like, I have budget information. So budget information is kind of like your expenditure information, expenditure accounts, the budgets associated with them. We have cash account. These ones, so if I see this cash account, this one basically corresponds to on my account grid, I have a cash account. I have appropriation account. And so if I were to pull, say, the cash account, this is pulling specifically the information generally that I would see on the cash account grid. In addition to that, these sort of have links to other pages. So my core information here is coming from the cash account. So if I had like fund balance, encumbrance, that's going to be like per cash account. But I have these arrows that sort of open up to like linked accounts. And so you'll see a lot of like linked data from different things that relate to that cash account in different parts of the software. Built off of that object. All right. And so especially when using the custom report creator, it's kind of a lot to start off with, a blank slate here because there are so many of these, because there are so many properties that you can pull from each one. Just to give another example here is like, so here's purchase order. So if I were to click purchase order, this is going to be all information associated with, the purchase order records. The next option we have at the top here is restore. So this actually shows me like different reports that are related to this object. So purchase order is the purchase order summary pulls from that object. So I could populate, and now I'm looking at the template. Now I'm looking at the setup for what a purchase order summary is built off of. And this is where it gets a little confusing, I think, to go from this, and this is why I like to go from go at it from the angle of just opening a report first. But we also have a couple here like purchase order item, purchase order charge. And so if you notice, purchase order, the only one that was available here was the purchase order summary. And that's because that is at like the header level of the purchase orders. So there's, each purchase order has that information on the top. And then it could have several different items on the bottom. And so this one is written based on like each purchase order number has one row, no matter how many items it has. But if I wanted to see information more by like the purchase order items, then actually the charge, because it could have each item could also have multiple accounts. So that's why it's broken down into charge. Then we can see that, some of our other reports here, are built off of, the purchase order charge. So that's outstanding purchase orders, that's purchase order detail, because when you're looking at those reports, it has one row per each, purchase order, not even just item per like account that's used. So if it has a split item, it would be able to break it down to that level of detail. The next thing we have here is when you're saving a report. So this is where I could give, once I build a report definition, I could give it any name that I wanted and then save it as a new report, and report manager would take you back to the report manager. So let's click that, because for our purposes of customizing today, I'm going to start with one of these reports that's already built. But I kind of wanted to go through that a little bit. I know we touch on it, we kind of talk about it, but really my goal here is in some of the recent trainings I've done with reports, like for any of you that may have been at SSDT Direct, Support Con, we talked about reports at some of those, and I kind of did some examples of like, okay, honestly, a little bit more realistic of like how I would customize. Like generally when I customize a report, I'm like, let's change this one thing. Let's see how it looks. Let's change this thing. Let's see how it looks. What I want to do today, because we're kind of like a reports 101, is, kind of just zoom in and talk about these different options within the customizer. Uh, just so that, because it's a lot here, it's a lot to do at once. And so I just want to talk about, kind of do a review of each one of these options. And some of them I'm sure you're very familiar with, but maybe there are some things that we just haven't talked about in a bit. Okay, so I'm starting with an appropriation summary report. And we talked about the select object here. And so this one runs off of the appropriation object. So again, this is coming from core accounts and then the appropriation grid within that. Let's see. And so now let's talk about these different tabs. So we have select properties. And then the select properties is what's going to determine what columns are actually showing on that report. Configure filters. This is what determines the rows and like what are the matching records that are going to be included on the report. Generate report has two purposes. First is the report options. This will actually let you save report options in the report definition. The query options and sort options on this page are just for the purpose of like generating to review your report in the process. These two tabs do not save anything within your report definition, only the report options on this one. So for properties, our first column here is the display name, and this is basically, if you're adding fields to your report, you can click and drag them over. I think that one was already on there. But this is, the basic name that is coming from the property, from the properties. If I hover over this, it does help me see, a little bit more information. This one is full account code. And one thing that's important to note with this is that this full account code is based on the object. So in this case, my object is the appropriation. So my full account code is the full appropriation code because that's directly linked to what this is. Next is the description. Again, this is the description based on the object. So it's the appropriation description, the appropriation account description. And then we have our totals. So we have fiscal to date appropriated, and we have, all of our totals again that are coming from that account. If you have, like, if I were to add anything maybe from the fund level related to these accounts, here, let's do that real quick. What do I want to add? Here, let's just add something. So if I wanted to add like the fund description, say, When I hover over this tooltip will tell me, that's from the fund, that's the description from the fund. So I can see that that's a little bit different, even though the display name is different, but that also kind of helps you get a path of like where that field is coming from. The next thing is sort priority. So the sort priority basically lays out like what order is the data going to be sorted in. And so in this case, first it'll be sorted by fund, then it'll be sorted by special cost center, and then thirdly by the appropriation account. And so I could change, these sort orders. Generally, you would have one, so, like each field would be a different sort priority. If we're talking about adding control headers, if we're talking about adding headers, that's where you may see some that are the same. And then sort order is going to directly link to this field. So if this is sorted, if this is one of the options to sort, ascending is, the lowest number to the highest number. If you wanted to reverse that, you could have it be like the highest number to the lowest number by changing that. Control break. So here, let's delete this so I can kind of look at this basic report setup. Control break. So this we talked about with the dynamic sort. The control break is what adds those headers and subtotals. So in this case, we have headers and subtotals by the fund and special cost center for this one. And then we have the function, and the function is basically, in this case, we can see the sum. So on any of these fields that, I always try and do this, I always try and highlight what I'm talking about, and then it moves it. So we have like fiscal to date appropriated, that's going to be a number. So on the subtotal, we can have this be a sum, so it'll show the total there. There are other options to do like the average or the minimum or the maximum. So if they ever wanted to change, what it's showing at the bottom of that column, they could. Some of these, like this one is a percent, so it wouldn't make sense to have it added up at the bottom. So we leave that one blank. And let's see. I'm going to talk about these extended properties. Is the other reason I'm kind of going through these, because I know we look at these extended properties, but we don't always talk about them. Let's just generate this report real quick though, so we kind of see like what we're working with at the start. I like to do that now that I've talked through all the columns. Maybe I should have filtered it. I'm working with a template version. Okay, well, you know what? We'll let it run. We'll let it run. We probably should have, we'll filter next time. Oh, there it is. See, you just gotta get a little impatient with it, and then it pops up for you. Okay, so when we're talking about control headers, so here we have the fund, the special cost center. Here are different columns that we have set up here. And then a little bit of scrolling. You know what? Let me just get to the bottom. And then here's where we can see, we have these subtotals. So each time there's a new special cost center within the fund, it's got the subtotals on there. So that's kind of what we're starting with. Okay, let's also look at these extended properties. So the first thing I want to mention about these is that you'll notice when you look at these extended properties that some of these things, display name, sort priority, sort order, those are also on the grid. And anything that, and here's function, if there's any of these fields that are both like on that select properties grid and in the extended properties, it's doing the same exact thing. However, when, we added these extended properties, the thought was like, okay, if I wanted to do everything from here, I could do everything from here. So if I needed to also change the sort priority, like while I was in here, I could do that. And then I could still save it and it would update. So, what's this one? Full account. Sorry, it is 3. So any of these fields that are the same, like it's basically doing the same thing. It's just for the fact of like, okay, if I'm doing multiple things in here, I wouldn't have to go back and forth. Outside of those, the first one here is suppressed. And what suppressed does is suppressed can be used to basically not have that column show on the report. So it says exclude the column from the detail line used for control break fields to prevent the value from printing on every line. And so for some of these, if I'm using it like as the control break with the fund and special cost center, I may use the suppressed so that when I look at this report, yes, I have it in the header, but I also don't need it down here. I can just have it in the header, and it's suppressed from actually showing in any of these. We don't have an extra column for it underneath those headers. So that's what that's saying. The other thing that I use it for, or that it's used for on these reports, is if you see down here, we have like the object and the object, I moved it again. Let's move it back. So generally you're not trying to highlight the text on these, it's just doing that for training purposes, but so apologies. But I have some of these extra fields on here, and those are used for that dynamic sort that I was talking about. And so if you see when you open one of these account reports, if you see a bunch of extra fields here, and then when you look at the report, we're like, okay, well, we don't have, you know, an individual column for the objects or anything. That's because all of these at the bottom are suppressed. So they're included in these properties, but there's not actually a column for them because they're suppressed. And the reason here, let me show you a visual, that they're there is because that allows them to be on this sortable properties list. That is the sole reason that they're there but suppressed, is so that they can be over here, so that when someone's running the report, they have those as an option to be able to sort on, even though we don't actually want to see those on the report. If we pulled them over, you know, we would maybe use them as a control break and have them suppressed the same way that the fund and special cost center are currently being used on here with being the control break and being suppressed. So so that's sort of why you may see that used. Suppress repeating, this one is, so if the same value appears in consecutive detail lines, suppress the repeating value. I don't know how often this one is used, honestly. I mean, there are certainly situations for it. Personally, with customizing reports, I haven't used it a ton. But like basically if I had something in these rows where it was like the same repeated value for this entire section, then it would only show it in like the first line that it applies, and then it wouldn't show it afterwards. This report maybe not the best example of it, but if I think about something maybe where it's like a transaction detail report, like each purchase order, you might want to show the vendor one time, but it's the same vendor for all the detail lines. So like only show the vendor in the first record of that section, but don't show the vendor repeating, basically. So that's what suppress repeating means. Control break, again, same thing as the control break that we see in the background. Page break. So if we were to do page break, we can use this in conjunction with the control break. And let's see. This will take a minute, but let's just run it again anyway. So what that's gonna do, and I did it specifically on the fund for this one. So each time there's a new fund, it's going to start that on like on a different page. The special cost centers then will still, you know, be underneath that, but each time there's a new specific fund, then it'll break it up to a separate page. We're probably gonna have to scroll a little bit to see this one. Let me get towards the bottom where we have some different funds. You know what? Let's do this. So here's our first fund. Oh, Oh, wait, did a page break on that? Okay. Hang on. You know what? I think I know what I did. When you click this, you have to click save. And that is a common one that I forget to do when I'm also talking through it. So apologies. Okay, let's generate that again. Yeah, whenever you're in those extended properties, yeah, you can make all the edits on this, but then you have to save them in there. And whereas when you're on the grid, you can just, click or unclick without that additional step. So, okay. Let's keep looking at this while this runs, and then we'll take a look at the page break. Just because the function is the same. The alignment, so alignment is like for that column, the same way as you think of maybe in like Excel or Word, where it's like, do you want it to be, centered? Do you want the text to be centered? Do you want it to be to the right or the left? That would align the specific column. So in this case, like the fund suppressed. But if I had information in like a specific column and I wanted to center it, I would use the alignment to do so. Okay, now let's go look at our page breaks. So we can see now the fund starts on a new page when I have this additional fund. So like all my special cost centers in the 002 are just on its own separate page. 003, that starts over on a new page. So that's the page break. And then let's go back to let's look at a column that we're using here. Let's look at description for the rest of these. So yeah, so again, alignment would change, like if I wanted it justified to a different side. Column title. So by default, this column title here, it says description, that is going to show whatever the display name is. But if you wanted to customize, if you wanted to customize whatever the title says, you could add that there. And here, let's save that. Oh, let's talk about the other ones before we keep running. The next section here we have is control footer only, control header only, and detail header only. And so these ones are used in combination with the control breaks. And so the control breaks add these basically like sections with the headers and footers. But what I could do is so let's go back. We had we had added the fund description. Let's add that back on here. And so basically when I'm talking about a control header only, that is something that's going to link to an existing control header. And so if I go to fund description, okay, so I want to link the description to this fund, to the fund header. And so this is number one. And so the fund description is also going to need to be sort priority 1. So when I mentioned, there are some times where those need to be the same. This is the situation. And if I come up here, I can click control header only. And that is going to link this to that fund header. And then it's going to show it along with each fund. So that's what that's doing. So let's go ahead and generate this now. We'll limit this to one fund for actually let's do the 202. And so we can see here now we've added that control header. So we added the fund description to our control header. We can also see our custom title up here when we change the description. So that's changing the title. And let's go back just for good measure. Let's see the control footer only. Let's save that. Let's generate this again. When you're generating these on the fly, remember that your like previously used parameters do not save, so we have to go type those in again. And now you can see, so we made it a footer instead of a header this time. So it's still linked to each time the fund group splits, but it's going to show it at the bottom. It's going to show it at the footer underneath where the subtotal is instead of at the top with this. The detail header, so this last one here, the detail header only, this one applies a little bit differently. I don't see this used as much. It's I think on like the budget summary versions it gets used. You know what? Let's put this back to, I liked it as the control header. The detail header, okay, because again, this is the control break. Like this is the control break information. These are the detail records here. Okay. And so when we're talking about a detail header, it's not going to apply to the fund level. It's going to apply at the appropriation level because these are the details. It might be a little bit too long on some of these, but see how we kind of have some wrapping here for the full account code and the description. So I think the better example here is this description. I did it again. This description is the appropriation account code description. And so let's make this one a detail header. And let's run that. I'll show you what it looks like. So see, now we have, and we had also changed what this one was called. So custom title, it's got the description now as a header of each individual detail record, which each individual detail record is a different appropriation account code. So that's what that looks like. And then, what's I gonna do? Oh, the last thing we have on here is, let's go to our account code, is the width. So this is going to determine the column width. So in this case, see my account code is wrapping. So maybe I want to make my width a bit wider for this. So let's make it say 25 characters wide. Let's generate this again. Did I save that? Did I save that? Let's double check now. Okay, I did. Now I'm paranoid. Okay. Okay. Let's run this. And we can see that the full account code is now stretched out so that we can see this entire code, you know, and it has much more space. Now, one thing to definitely keep in mind with widening those columns, you could widen any of these columns. However, there is only so much room on the report. One of the reasons that I wanted to show the appropriation summary report specifically is because we get questions on this one for customizing, specifically when using the summary version. I've done some odd customization, so I'm not sure. Let's just run it as is and see where we're at, but this really may not be like the most prime example. But basically, when you run the summary version, it shows like your control break headers and your subtotals, right? And then in this one, we also had the additional control break by the special cost centers. So in this case, it's showing basically just like that header information and the subtotal information. So sometimes we'll see this one where, yeah, it's broken down by like maybe fund or objects, and they want to see it just as this summary version instead of all of the detail of the actual appropriation accounts. They kind of just want the totals. However, there are a lot of columns on this report. And so when you're running it in summary view, if these figures, if these amounts are more money, then sometimes these columns don't like appropriately account for how big those amounts are. And so that's one thing that we get questions on. Basically, because again, these template reports are all kind of built on this like simple framework where you can put anything together in any which way. The template versions, our SSDT template versions, are built by default to accommodate the detailed data. So, that original way of running it, this view that we're looking at here, this is what it's built to accommodate everything and how it's viewed in this version. However, even if you're only clicking summary on this, sometimes with the bigger figures, I've seen it where, because there are so many columns, that view can be tough for viewing it. So this is a situation where you may want to help your districts with making a custom version that they use only when they're doing it in summary version. Um, and generally that would be, whichever one of these amounts is like wrapping and maybe not showing, you could use the width to widen it. The other thing that may help, because again, even if you're widening, you still may only have so much room, is if you're specifically building a report to be run in summary view, notice that things that don't have a function added on, which that was like the sum, right? Uh, they don't show, they're not included. And so like this column in the last row here this last column was the percentages. And percentages don't show on the summary version. So if you're building a custom report just for that summary version, you could delete that column off. So, here is the percent expended encumbered, and I could use the X and I could remove that from my report. Some other things, usually this one, the future encumbrances, when they seem to be using it for this summary view, they're not focused on the future encumbrances. A lot of times those are 0, 2, depending on how they process. So that may be another column where, you could delete off the future encumbrance column. And then, so let's see, summary report. Let me just put in my fund here. And we could generate this. And then we'd have a bit more room to be able to view each of our columns. And what I could do is, just save this up and then have this be like custom appropriation summary report. And I would save that to my report manager. So, I know it's like a little back to basics with going through, each of those different properties. But that is something I wanted to do. Wow, we are burning through time here. So let me just mention the filters real quick, and then I'm gonna wrap up on my portion. Um, the configure filters, similar setup where these have you can add filters based on the properties on this side. We're seeing the display name of these fields. This is going to determine, um, which rows, which accounts are included in our report. Now, if you're looking at the SSDT versions of reports, a lot of times you see these values that say param. And specifically what that is setting up when you see those is when I'm generating this, I have these query parameters where I can enter this in differently each time I run the report on the fly. And so when I see this param setup in these filters, what that is doing is it's specifically doing the setup of, okay, what's the field? Is there a default value? And then what does this say? So this right here is setting up what does this say? So what's like the description? And then when I put something in here, so let's see, I was using fund, include fund 002. Using this is right here, fund. Oops, I can't believe I keep doing this. Fund, and then it's using this setup based on whatever I've entered when I'm generating the report. Now, if I wanted to hard code something into this report, I could overwrite that, or if I'm setting it up for the first time, fund 002, that is doing the same exact thing that I've been doing by typing it in on the fly, except for if I looked at this, now I don't have one that says include fund. It would just always run for the 002. The other thing I want to hit on real quickly, and then we'll wrap this up, is the different operations. So one of is basically a filter where I could include a list of things, so separated by commas, so I could say, it's either this fund or this fund or this fund. Like that I see down here is what uses the wildcards. So if I wanted to instead do like 5%, that would be anything that is like what I've entered, which means anything that starts with a 5, any fund that starts with a 5 is going to be like. There are a couple other ones too. Equals is like this exact value. It has to be this exact value. Not equals. It's anything except for this exact value. Between would be like a starting value, comma, an ending value. And then we sort of have our greater, less than, equal to, all of those standard ones. Let me go to one last part here. Let me take you to a documentation page to wrap us up. In the report section, custom report creators. So, we looked at that. I said you don't often start from there, but this page in the wiki specifically has a lot of the detail about all of these different sections. And so when we look at select properties, configure filters, we have a lot of detail on this page. And so a lot of these things that I've just quickly hit on at the end, the different operations, the specifics of what each of those mean, and examples of how they would be entered can be found here. Also, the param setup, if you're looking to do those like custom, with having the description and being able to enter a parameter, that is also on this custom report creator page. So that is a great resource for this part of the equation with customizing reports. So once I save up my report, that is going to show on my report manager. And saving a report, this is only going to be saved under my reports. And so, if this is a user at the district, they can create any custom reports that they want. If you have admin reports, then you could see them. So at the ITC, you can see their custom reports. Uh, Two last things is this is where you would download the report definition. So if they wanted to share that specifically, they could download the definition and somebody else could import the report, say at like a different district. Or they could share report definitions with certain roles at their district. So if you wanted to share this with, a certain like role, everybody that has standard access, they would be able to do that as well to share reports. So, okay. So, that was a lot of information about customizing reports. But hopefully that was helpful. I know that we talk about this in different ways, like, here and there. And I just thought for this one to be kind of good to, kind of really go through each one of those options. Some of them you may use all the time and be super familiar with, and some of them maybe you haven't looked at for a while. So let's go ahead and I'm going to wrap up the USAS side here. Awesome. Yes, thank you all. Thank you. And I know reports is like a lot on the brain too. So let's take a break. I don't know if Lori's here. I mean, I'm thinking like maybe because we're at 10:33, so maybe like start at 10:40 since that's a nice round number, or I don't know if you just want to do 5 minutes, Lori, whatever you feel.
10 minutes is great. They probably need some
Yeah, need
stretch
a little
time
brain break.
and grab some coffee. So,
10 minutes. Okay, so you think like 10:43 we'll start back up?
sure, that's great.
Perfect. Okay, well, we will see you all then. Everyone, grab some coffee. We'll be back soon.
Okay. Everything's set up here, got the recording going. I think we are good to go. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and switch gears and talk about the payroll side of reports. Amanda did such a wonderful job of, explaining the process and going through, the customizing portion of reports. So I'm going to start out with just a really quick example of, you know, taking a template report that we already have on the payroll side and then just tweaking that a little bit to make it maybe more useful and meet the needs of, how a district might need a report to look. So this is a really quick, easy example. I'm going to use the SSDT future pay report. So if we scroll down here, and this is the report I'm talking about. I already have, run that report just as is. So you can see here, this is how the report would look then with that information that we have out in payroll payments future. Now I've taken that report and I've done a little customization to that. And the first example I want to show you is then creating that report sorted by pay group. So if I look at that report definition that I've created, I've also added some additional information like the pay account that's associated with that particular payment, the employer distribution flag, the leave projection flag. So I've added some additional information, and then you can see here that I've also added a configure filter option to allow me then to, specify specific pay groups. So maybe, you know, based on how the district's staff is set up, maybe some staff only deal with, certain pay groups of people, like certified, classified, subs, those sorts of groups of people. So it might be helpful to be able to enter pay groups and only see information for those employees that they're, specifically paying and inputting information for. So again, I've already generated that report, and you can see here that then it's then sorted this by those different pay groups. So here's the pay group column. It's sorted and subtotaled based on the pay group. Now I'm going to take that one step further. And I'm going to go back to my report manager here. And I've changed it up just a little bit different on this third example. And you can see here that I then, I'm not doing anything with the pay groups, but I've added some additional fields. So the pay account information, and we can see how that then looks. Whoops, here's how that report would look. So all the pay account information, the employer distribution, and the leave projection. And I apologize. I think my second example, I had changed my samples up a little bit after I ran those reports. So, and I didn't rerun those. So let's pretend that second example didn't have all that information, extra information. We just, had the pay group sorted. And then our last example then is when we added all this extra information to see the pay account and then the employer distribution and leave projection. So again, that just gives you kind of a real brief overview on customizing the reports on the payroll side. I know this happens. I don't know how often compared to the USAS side it happens because, a lot of our reports are already pretty cut and dry, and then you can sort them, subtotal them as needed. But of course, there is definitely the need for that. So here, I just wanted to provide a real quick example of how that can work and happen. What we're going to focus on mainly going forward are the various reports that we have available, and then kind of grouping those for like use case, and talking through the canned reports that we have out there. So, for example, the first group of reports that we're going to talk about are just useful reports that are out there to verify different reporting entities' information. So EMIS, retirement, ODJFS, those sorts of things. What reports can I use that maybe aren't, you aren't as familiar with, or you kind of forget about, to be able to, access that information and use it for verifying and looking at records or data that way. So the first report that we're going to talk about is the eligible to retire report. And I think a lot of times this gets forgotten. This actually was a report that was written by an ITC in classic days. And so for those of you that were around during the classic days, you might remember it as the ELIRET report. So this, a lot of times districts are using for gap reporting. Again, a good way to look at, that information to determine who's, eligible to retire, how many years of service do they have, and so forth. So this is the report that you're able to now run and redesign, called eligible to retire report. You can specify a retirement system if you only want to run this for SERS or STRS. You have that ability. Leaving it blank is going to generate the report for both retirement systems. So I'm going to actually start closing some of these many tabs that I have open. And you can see here that I've generated this report. Now bear with me, because our anonymized test instance is kind of all out of whack, and I was not about to go through and correct, how many employees. So I kind of focused on a couple here. We're going to look at, make this a little bigger for you. Hopefully everybody can see it okay. This Drew Bruce here. So you can see, if I scroll back up, this report provides the age, the retirement system, then the district experience, total experience, and then, age with 5 years of experience, the 55 years with 25 years experience, and then 30. So this report is generating this information by first, the age, looking at the birth date on the employee record, and then comparing that to the current system date. It's also using gathering the district information and the total, the district experience and the total experience from those fields on the employee record as well. So I'm sure you guys are all aware of this, but if I go to an employee and I look at this employee here, there's the total experience and then the district experience. So that's, those are the two fields that the report's using to gather those totals. I'll hop back here to the report. The age is calculated by taking the birth date, then comparing that to the current system date. The experience years are calculated using the total experience. So if somebody has, in this case, 1 year of experience and the total experience is 11, those could be different based on, if an employee worked at another district previously. it's always using this total experience field to calculate these values. Okay. All right. One thing I wanted to point out when it comes to this report is currently there's no way to just gather the report for active employees. So I know we've had this pointed out many times. It's going to include archived employees. So currently, we need a way, and we do have a feedback issue for that. It's 1668 for anyone that's interested, to only generate the report for those employees that are active. So that is one thing I wanted to point out. All right. Kind of have some notes here so I'm not forgetting anything. The next report that can be helpful when verifying this type of information is the reporting entity count summary report. So this allows you to generate a report for, lots of different days, or weeks. So we have retirement days, we have ODJFS weeks, EMIS days. So if we want to be checking, especially at this time of year when we're reporting EMIS, attendance days, we're, focusing on fiscal year end. So we have retirement days that we're wanting to check. If we want to verify ODJFS weeks for any reason, we can use this report, at any time throughout the fiscal year, to check this information. So keep in mind that the retirement start and end dates are always the pay period. So we're not using pay dates, we're using pay periods. When it comes to ODJFS weeks, we do have this kind of outlined or detailed and spelled out in the documentation, but it's using the calendar start and stop dates. So this is going to be calendar start and stop dates. And then again, the EMIS days are using the period, the payroll beginning and end dates. Okay, so those dates are always tricky. Again, always, look back to the documentation. We kind of hopefully help spell that out for you, to determine, am I supposed to use a pay date? Am I supposed to use payroll, period beginning and ending dates? It's all outlined there. So again, based on how, what boxes you've checked here, determines what information will be, generated and included in the report. So again, we have our, retirement information, we have ODJFS weeks, we have attendance, or I'm sorry, EMIS absence and attendance information, our long-term illnesses. So this is a great, way to just spot check those long-term illnesses before they get reported at this time of year. And, process through the data collector, and then the percentage of attendance. So again, super helpful with, this time of year, and everything, going on as far as EMIS reporting and, fiscal year end, and retirement reporting. All right. If you guys have any questions at any time, please stop me, interrupt. That's not a problem, or put your question in the chat. I'll try to be mindful and look at that, and catch those. All right, we're going to switch gears then and talk next about auditing reports. So basically, there are three auditing features, within on the USPS side. The first is the SSDT auditable events option. So if we go to the home page, that is a template report. It allows us to create a report based on a certain date range. And again, just like any other report, we do ask, put in a date range, otherwise that report's gonna be running forever. This report I use a lot, and I think it gets overlooked and missed. I use this, to go out and kind of, see timestamps, date and timestamps on series of events. One situation that comes to mind is, the question of a district reached out and their check numbers for their payments for like their physical payroll checks isn't matching what they expected it to be. So chances are, if you run this report, they posted their payroll, they printed their physical checks, they unposted their payroll for whatever reason, and then they posted their payroll again and they moved right on to posting their payables. So now they've printed their, payable checks, their deduction checks, and those numbers, because they weren't officially assigned or the payments didn't get processed again on the system, those numbers got assigned then, those original check numbers, excuse me, got assigned to those now payable checks. So using this report, this SSDT Auditable Events report, we can kind of see then that sequence of events. So they posted the payroll, the payable was complete. Excuse me, my throat is so dry today. If they unposted the payroll then, and then they move right on to posting their payables, and we don't see that processed payments option listed along with, before they process their payables, then that's exactly what happened. So again, use this for kind of a series of events, you know, to see timestamps of when things happened. I use this a lot for just seeing when the payroll was posted, and maybe I need to pull, like from an ITC standpoint, pull a specific backup of a payrolls of a district's files, prior to them posting a payroll, so I can see something, how something looked prior to them, posting. So I can use this, from an ITC perspective as well to do things like that. So that's the auditable events report. The next then is just the straight up audit report. So if I go under reports and I go to audit report, here's the audit report that allows me again to enter a date range. I can specify an object. So if I want to just have, see an audit report of, job calendar information, leave balance, pay distributions, I can get very specific. The latest addition to this report is the user payables adjustment option. So again, prior to this enhancement, if you go to the outstanding payables and you enter then, if you enter any payables adjustments and then those get processed, they get cleared out of this grid. So lots of times, districts were reaching out to you, saying, hey, it would be wonderful to have a way to know, I'm balancing at the end of the month. I want to know what user, payable adjustments were entered. Is there a way to capture that information? So now you can go to the audit report, enter the date range, and then you can select the user payables adjustment option. We can just run this here real quick, and you should be able to see any of those adjustments that were entered. So it tells us, it was added on this date and time, the amount. So this can be, you know, very helpful when it comes to balancing. The other thing I wanted to mention when it comes to this report is, you know, the ability to get very detailed when it comes to a specific operation. So, you know, if you're running this for, you know, quite a large date range, we want to get as specific as possible so that the report, you know, doesn't take as long to run. So if I know I'm looking for everything that was modified, added, you know, deleted, whatever that might be, you know, use those operations and, you know, specify those so that it kind of narrows down, and it'll obviously help you search through that report to find what you need as well. Keep in mind, because we've had questions on this before, the specific users that are listed here, we've had questions on, hey, there's, you know, users that are listed in this you know, grid as available that they're not an active user. Like, why are they still listed? So any user that touched, you know, or had any basically auditable event, you know, anything that any user that triggered anything to be auditable will be listed in this grid here, and you know, allow you to move that to the selected side and be chosen. So just because the user is inactive doesn't mean that they're going to be, you know, not listed in this list as a user to be, you know, selected. Because they touched something that involved, you know, auditing, they will remain in, you know, on the history basically. Okay. All right. So that is the audit report. And again, just keep in mind that, you know, we've we've now added that the user payables adjustment. So great way to get information when it comes to those adjustments that were made. Another thing I wanted to mention is the single object audit report. So you're going to find, you know, and hopefully everybody's aware of this by now. When you go to an employee's record, and I'm going to pick the compensation here. If I go to view the employee record, we're going to see this audit report option here. So if I select that, this is just generating an audit report specific to this individual record. So instead of me going to the audit report, the full audit report, and having to kind of narrow down what I'm looking for, that way I can simply select the audit report right on this particular screen, enter my date range, and generate the report. And it's going to list just the information then for this specific record, and any change that deals with the date range that I've entered. So if I open that up, I can see then any changes that were made, the old value and the new value, just like any other audit report, the timestamp, and so forth. What I like about this report, or what I use this in particular when it comes to the compensation record, is it's tracking each time the employee is paid, it's tracking those contract work days. So I can see here on this particular date, which probably should correlate to, you know, a pay date in around or on or after, or pretty close to June 10th. And I should see then that that employee's, you know, days worked increased by 10 days. So the new value should be 154. If I'm working with, like, you know, this time of year, advance time, and I am trying to figure out why somebody's days are off, this is a very useful tool to go through and see, okay, in this pay period, on this pay date, then the system counted 10 days. If I go to that employee's job calendar and I enter that pay period's date range, do the number of work days within that pay period match what the system counted? If not, chances are then that employee's job calendar got updated at some point, after this payroll was posted. So I could go, into that specific job calendar. I could then run the audit report on that specific job calendar, and it would tell me then, any changes that were made on, the job calendar within, that certain date range. So a lot of times, again, I, use this to determine, okay, this is what the system says should have happened, between on this pay date, this pay date, this pay date, this pay date. Does it match up to what the calendar days say? Okay. All right. Make sure I'm not missing anything here. I don't think so. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. Does anyone have any questions on the auditing part? I love that new, that single object audit report that we added a bit, some time ago. It makes auditing so super easy. All right. The next set of reports that we're going to cover are the EMIS reports. So again, because we're working with, year-end, that final L reporting period, I can't emphasize enough, districts should be going out and running those EMIS reports. So under EMIS reports, we have the EMIS data collection reports, and they're going to want to run the employee and the position report before they do anything else. So we want to make sure that those two reports are error-free. So you can see here, the position report has 0 errors. However, the employee report has errors listed. So if we go down to the bottom, we can see there's 15 errors here. So again, we hope to get to a point where these errors are much more user-friendly. But until then, it does, require, some intervention by you at the ITC. So to get you familiar and comfortable with, how to correct these errors or tools that can help you, we do have whoops, I thought I had this open. I'm sorry. Let me we'll just all right. So in our actually here, I'm getting myself all mixed up. In our wiki, got everything set up so nicely, but you click out of one thing and it throws you off. So under the meetings and trainings page, we have this ITC only support resources. And we have this document here called Debugging EMIS Report Errors. So this steps you through basically how to help the district determine what the problem is. So if I go back to my instance here and I go to System and Monitor, I'm going to click on this logging option. That checklist that I just showed you, or that procedure, it steps you through all that. So I'm kind of, stepping you through that so you can see it. Under name, we're going to type EMIS-R, and then I'm going to click over here. And normally this would be set to be blank. We're going to set that to be debug. Okay. And then I'm going to click off of that and click save. So what this does is once we rerun that report, so if I would go back to EMIS reports and I go back to the data collection reports and I run that employee report, if I then go back to system, monitor, and I click on the app log, now I'm going to see, and I probably should run that again. I ran that last night and I've run all kinds of stuff today. So let me scroll down and see if here we go. It's not down that far. All right. So you can see here that this is what you would see then under the app log. And now it gives me very specific information as far as what is wrong with that particular record. So I can see here that this employee, position 1, has no active compensations. And so they have attendance, information, absence information in attendance posted. And so the length of that absence cannot be determined. Again, similar situation, going down the list. So this is what we are finding, to be the most common error. And I did want to touch upon that just a little bit, because I know it's confusing. But remember, attendance is calculated at the employee level. So just because an employee's compensation position is not flagged for retirement reporting, if that employee has attendance information attached to it, the attendance information is counted. So, it's not excluded just when it comes to attendance, just because that employee's position compensation is not marked for reporting. So the system needs to go through and it needs to figure out then if it's posted in hours, what it has to convert that to days. So, what part of this employee's day, what part of this hour that we've posted, these hours we've posted, what percentage of day is that for this employee? Because everything gets reported to EMIS in days. Okay, so again, a couple parts to remember. Just because the employee's not marked, their position and or compensation isn't marked for EMIS reporting, if they have absence information attached to that position that's in hours, there has to be an hours in a day value in order for that conversion to days to happen. So the system looks at the hours in a day on the compensation record. And if there's a value there, then it's dividing the hours in a day, into that hour value that we've attached the absence record to. If that's blank, then it's going to go to the position. So the position, there's that override field. So this EMIS override hours in a day field, it will look at that if the compensation hours in a day is blank. If this value, is blank as well, then an error is going to be produced. We need to know, to make that conversion, we need to do the math. So there has to be a value in one of those places. Okay. So I know that we've had a lot of questions on that, and I know it's confusing. But just remember that absence and attendance information is collected at the employee level, not by the position and compensation. Okay? All right. So again, we're going to run this report until all of these errors on both of the reports, until those are gone. Then, we suggest the district moves on to the data collector. And, hopefully that prevents a lot of those errors that they would get if they just, went to the data collector and overlooked these two reports. We do have out in the USPS and EMIS connection area of the documentation, we do have this EMIS level 1 errors explanation. So what we've done is we've taken all of those level 1 errors that are out in the data collector, and we've, kind of organized them in a manner that makes sense. So there's a tab for the demographic errors, the employment errors, the contractor, and the contract only errors. So we've separated those out, and then we've listed all of the errors and the description that it's going to list on the data collector side. And then if we scroll over, we've then sort of outlined the path that's going to take the user then to the particular field on the USPS side, and point them in the right direction to know where to go to fix that. Okay, so we're taking the data collector error and kind of combining this, putting the two pieces together, and giving them a document to hopefully, kind of guide them through cleaning up the errors when it comes to the data collector. All right. Looks like I have that open twice. All right, and there's information out, obviously, on the EMIS side, out on the website. It lists the codes here, so you can match up the code, on their website with our document, and that's helpful. That's a helpful resource as well. The last and the newest EMIS tool is the EMIS data extract report. So this report, is our sort of, I don't know, second stab at trying to come up with a per det report. Those of you that were familiar with the classic version of the software, that's where we're hoping to get to eventually. This is one step closer. So it is a very nice report and an easy way for districts to look at their EMIS information in lots of different ways. So we can, include only records that are reportable to EMIS, if we like to look at the information that way. Sometimes you want to look at, everything because you want to make sure you're not missing something. So you can uncheck that box if you'd like. You can, filter this information, which you'll probably want to do, maybe by the contract start date, the last paid date. You can get, very specific and just look at the information by certified and classified. You can just run the report for specific employees, pay groups, position codes. Again, lots of different ways to generate the report. And just districts, you want to encourage them to run this multiple ways so that they can look at the information in different ways, to make sure that everything looks correct, they're not missing anything, and they're good to go. Let me get closed out of this stuff so I don't keep clicking on it. So let me just run this real quick. Oh, actually, I probably already did. Let me go down here. I guess I didn't. we'll run this quick and then we'll just take a quick look and you can see, again, it's kind of putting all the pieces together and allows you then to look at all of the information, in one place that will be reported, through the data collector. Okay, so again, you can use this report, obviously the first two reports that we touched upon, along with that reporting entity count summary report, that allows you to kind of look at the details of, attendance and absence information when it comes to EMIS, the percentage, the attendance percentage. So you can use all of these reports to help, assure that the information that you're reporting when it gets to the data collector is accurate. All right. Okay. That is all I have when it comes to the EMIS reporting side of things. Next, we'll move on to leave and leave balance reports. So a lot of times, this time of year, it's the end of the fiscal year, districts are, giving leave balances a good hard look. If they're getting audited over the summer, definitely the auditors are pulling this information and looking at that as well. So just to give you an idea and make sure everybody's aware of all the reports involved or that are out there that when it comes to leave. So the first report is going to the details of the payroll itself. So if I select pick a payroll here, this is the leave report that can be generated then when it comes to this particular payroll. So those of you that were familiar with Classic, check leave was the old Classic version report name. Now we have the ability to generate that and look at that in redesign as well. So based on this particular payroll, these employees used, this amount of time. So districts might want to, take their leave information once they've posted that, and, that they've run their payroll, they have a way to then check that and make sure it's accurate, at this time. So this gives us, a look at that, what was included, what will be printed on the employee's check as their usage and balance. This gives us a way to look at that from that perspective. The next report when it comes to leave is under reports, and that's the leave activity report. So again, you can, use start and end dates to generate this based on a specific date range. We have tooltips that tell you, that the dates will be, used as of the starting date and ending date. And then you can get, very specific, and maybe I only want to look at sick leave at this time, personal leave, maybe I'm, doing some kind of, check on my personal leave before I roll those over to pay those out or convert them to sick leave. I have the ability to look at specific, types of leave if I would like to. I can choose a specific employee if I would like to. So again, once I generate that report, and actually I think I have it set up here, you can see, hopefully it's big enough here. You can see it gives me a breakdown then of the starting balance based on that beginning date that I entered, and then the ending balance based on that ending date that I entered. It's broken down by sick, personal, and vacation. So, I have all of that information in front of me if I chose to include all leave types, which I did. One thing that I wanted to point out when it comes to the leave activity report are these two sets of dates. So the activity date and the date applied. These are two different dates. Okay, so we can see here, or hopefully you can see, this employee, this third leave line listed has an activity date of 4/18. It has a date applied of 6/10. So what this is telling us is the activity date is the date that the user entered this absence date for. So I'm saying that they took, a 7 hours of sick leave on 4/18. I can enter that 4/18 record at any time. So just because I put an activity date of 4/18, if I would be going back to this employee's leave and trying to balance that as of, around say the month of April, and I'm expecting those 7 hours to show up, I'm gonna struggle to balance. That's because this date here is telling us it actually affected the employee's balance on 6/10. Okay, so not until June 10th did this employee's balance get reduced by 7 hours. Okay, so that I think has, obviously that can get confusing, and I know we get questions about that a lot, but when you're balancing, you know, or get questions about balancing, leave, these two dates become very important because this is telling us when did this, amount affect the employee's balance. It wasn't till months later. All right. The other thing that's helpful when it comes to, balancing, or I find helpful when, helping balance is, go to the employee's payment and you should be able to match up. If I open the details of this payment here, between these two, looking at the leave activity report and the information that was printed on the employee's check, as far as like the accumulated value and the used value, we should be able to match these up to this leave activity report, and everything that's listed on here. So sometimes it's easy, it's easy to print this out and, I can look at this while I'm looking at the details, and I should be able to go, from payment to payment and follow right along with what happened here. If it doesn't, there could be a chance that a record got deleted, and those sorts of things. So, those using those two and going through payment by payment can be helpful as well to determine, why somebody's balance might be off. Okay, so make sure I'm not missing anything when it comes to that report. All right, the next report then is the leave balance report. So the leave balance report, again, you can run this, as of a specific date. You can specify pay groups of people, and it's just that. It's going to give me a balance as of that specific date for all those different leave types. So here's the report. And you can see here then that it gives me a breakdown by employee of their sick, vacation, and personal leave. So this report, it is copied out in the file archive. So at fiscal year end time, you can, users can go to the fiscal year end folder, and they'll be able to see then that leave balance report that gets copied out automatically for them. Okay, so again, auditors can go out, grab that report. I know a lot of times they, use when they closed, or at year end, they're taking that and balancing backwards to make sure everybody got credit or was charged for the right amount of leave. Lastly then is the benefit obligation report. Got sidetracked or lost my train of thought there for a second. The benefit obligation report, this can again be helpful for gap reporting, or if districts are trying to use this for any kind of budgeting tool to project out, how much it's going to cost if, as of a certain date, if they needed to pay out everybody's benefits. So again, there's two report options. You can generate the report by account. So it's breaking it out by account and how much that cost would be for each type of leave, and then as well as by employee. So if districts need, something when it comes to the cost of leave and not so much balancing, they can use the benefit obligation report to do that. All right. One last thing when it comes to leave, I wanted to show a little trick here. I think sometimes we forget about looking at an employee's leave from from their dashboard and the leaves grid. So if I go to this employee's leave rec screen and I just single click on the particular leave line that I'm interested in looking at, it's going to bring up the highlight view. And if I scroll down, this is giving me the history of everything, that happened all the way back to, the start of this employee's records. If the employee's leave balance was cleared for any reason, maybe they cleared a leave maximum, and we know we don't want to do that because that will clear the employee's balance. If that happens, then all of these records are gone. So you will not see any leave balance detail. So that's a good sign that, hey, if I'm supposed to be seeing history here and there's not something here, or maybe there is some, but I should see a lot more, chances are that leave maximum got cleared, and that cleared the balance, and which is going to clear a lot of these records here. So if that situation happens, or a district is reaching out to you and asking for assistance with when it comes to, why did that happen? This is a good tool a good place to start to look at to see, hey, did their leave balance get cleared at some point? If that's the case, then, that gives you some kind of indication that a maximum was cleared, or something else happened that restarted that employee's leave balance. Okay. All right. that is what we have when it comes to leave balances. The next area we're going to touch upon is account charging. So I'm just going to close up some of these tabs here. So when it comes to account charging and needing reports for how much was charged to a grant account or those sorts of things, we have a few ways to get that information, and the best report out there to do that is the account history report. So this is a newer canned report. Before we had a couple different flavors of the account history report that were template reports. So we had version 1 and then version 2, and neither one quite got us what we needed. So third time's a charm, right? So if you go to reports and we go to account history, this is going to give you everything needed when it comes to grabbing information for specific account charging and grabbing those amounts. So we can subtotal, we can page break, we can include or exclude voided payments. So by default, that's going to be checked. We can enter a date range. So if we enter an ending date from, this is going to give us information from that pay date and after, and then the ending date is going to give us by pay date, I'm sorry, by period ending date, it says right in the tooltip, this date or before. So this is going to allow us to enter period ending dates, and this is going to give us the ability to enter pay dates. So grab that information by pay date. We can enter pay groups. We can grab a report for just employees, specific employees. Down here at the bottom, it gives us the ability to enter wildcards. So we can enter specific account information if we'd like. So again, you can use wildcards. So if we want to, get very specific, we can use wildcards, and the percent sign can be used to indicate multiple digits. If you don't want to filter by any given account dimension, you can just leave that blank. And the account filtering is only going to happen on those account dimensions that have account filtering entered. Okay, so you can see here we've entered a fund of 401. I actually went out and just grabbed the pay account distribution detail report from a specific payroll, and you can see here that these um, accounts were charged during that process or that payroll. And then if I run the report for the account history report for that specific fund, it's just giving me a report then of all that information for that specific, filtering value that I've entered when I run the account history report. So again, you can, get very detailed if districts are, tracking their grant accounts, or want specific information for a specific account, even a specific employee, they're able to now get that and not have to run a couple different flavors of a report to capture that information. So love the new account history report. Another means to grab some useful account charging information is to go to the employee earnings register. So we just recently added this CSV version of the earnings register. So again, this report is very large. So I've, entered this just for the month of June. And I then just selected a specific employee. And when I generate this employee earnings register in CSV format, you can see that it gives me, well, I must have opened this one and it's more than just that person. I'm sorry. You're going to see lots of people here. You can see that it gives you, you know, basically everything about that payment. So the, gross amount, net amount, but it also lists then the different pay accounts and then the amount charged and then the percentages and then all the deduction information, payroll item information. So this also gives you a way to look at pay accounts that were charged and the history of, that charging. So I wanted to make sure that, I pointed that out because this is a newer feature of the employee earnings register. And it does give you a way to grab that information if you want to look at it that way. And then lastly is the wage obligation reports. So again, used more for budgeting and gap reporting and so forth. Not so much, maybe balancing, but budgeting and that sort of thing. Just like the benefit obligation, you have the ability to run this by in the account format or by the employee. So I've run that here, and you can see here that, by account, it gives me the contract obligation, the accrued wages, and then the remaining contract amount yet to be paid. So gives me a look by account, and then, oops, did I not run it? I thought I already had run this by employee. Sorry, I had so many tabs, had to set up so many tabs, and I tried to be so good about getting all that together. I must have closed one. Okay. So you can see here, again, by account and then by employee. So two different versions of that report to give you the ability to look at that, however the district needs to. We do have in the documentation, it kind of goes through and explains, the calculation process and, how the accrued wages are calculated, the contract remaining, and then even some information on, what criteria needs to be in place in order for an employee to even be listed on the report at all. So I just wanted to point that out. If there's questions on why somebody's, appearing the way it is, or maybe not appearing at all, there is some helpful information in the wage obligation chapter that will help step you through maybe, what your question is. All right. Oh, one other thing, just looking at my notes here, I did want to point out, we get questions, often about like, is there a report out there I can run to maybe look at board paid insurances for the year? And that's those sort of costs. Don't forget that you can run the employer distribution report obviously if the district is tracking those employer paid payroll items on the system by using the start and end dates for the time frame that they're looking for totals, the information for. enter those dates here, go down and select those payroll items and then generate the report. And that's going to give you a way to look at the information when it comes to the by employee. So, when it gets moved over to the USAS side, those costs or those charges don't include the employee detail. So a lot of times districts want to see the actual cost and at the employee with the employee name attached to it. So the USAS side unfortunately doesn't give them that. But you can run the employer distribution again if the district is tracking those board paid benefits on the system. You can use the employer distributions report to help with that, get that information. All right, I think there might be a question, so I'm going to hop over here. Okay, the question is, are there any suggestions for a report that can be used for retirement certifications other than the earnings register? Currently, that doesn't break it down by payments and lumps everything into one line. So we have to research a different and regular pay amount by going back through the actual payroll. Yeah, I know. Yeah, we do have a feedback. Let me think about that. I'm off the top of my head, nothing's coming to mind, Vicky, but I don't want to. I want to think that through just slightly and see if there's not something that we can come up with in the meantime for you. So let me make a quick note here and I will look into that. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. We'll get back to you for sure. All right. The last couple groups of reports that I wanted to talk about is some fiscal year end reports. And obviously that's, pertinent to this time of year. I wanted to make sure that before we actually talk about a couple fiscal year end reports, that we pointed out the fact that after the districts have run their STRS advance and they've gone through their summer pays, please make a note, either someone at the district or you at the ITC, to go back to the configuration option and look at this STRS advanced configuration screen and make sure that this screen here is set up like it should be. So once all the advance payments are completed, this amount here should be 0. This box here should be unchecked. If it still looks something similar to this, or at this, the beginning of next calendar year, it's remembered that, oh shoot, we didn't check the STRS advanced configurations, or someone at the district didn't do that. It's going to look similar to this if they did not balance. So the original advance amount is still going to be in this field here. This box is still going to be checked, and this amount paid back will be 0. So what that's telling us is, excuse me, that this district did not balance back, meaning that their amount paid back did not equal or exceed this original advanced amount here. If it's a penny off, it's going to look like this. And the reason this is zeroed out after January 1st is because the system is looking at the current calendar year. So when we get to January 2026, this is going to say 0, and that also confuses, all of us. So why does it say 0? Like they paid something back. It's because the system is looking at the current calendar year, and then, as of that time, 2026, there wouldn't have been anything paid back. So it zeroes out that field. But this is a strong, indication that this district, did not, their STRS advance did not balance, and either they corrected that with, STRS, and this just didn't get updated by, someone at the ITC, and that's all that needs to be done. You know, this does need to be, checked, verified, and we strongly suggest that once, the advance pays are over, that just, put it on a checklist somewhere, whether it be you at the ITC or the district, for them to go out and be checking this, and verify that everything looks as it should, and then obviously they're not able to change this, make any changes to it, they would reach out to you at the ITC, and then together you can make sure that everything on their end, along with, you fixing this for them, is updated and reported correctly to STRS. Okay, all right. Enough about the advanced configuration screen. I just wanted to throw that out there because we did have several questions on that, just within the last couple months. So if we can maybe make it a habit to check that a little sooner, then none of us are going to be in panic mode and think, oh my gosh, has something been wrong all year, and so forth. So just wanted to throw that out there. But let's move on to another set of reports that districts should be running as part of their fiscal year end, and those are those auditor of state reports. So we have the employee report and then the payments report. So again, we have this on our fiscal year end checklist, step 17. It talks about running those reports. They can be, scheduled in the job scheduler. So, that they're just automatically going to be scheduled to run. You do want to make sure that, July is current, because the reports look at the previous fiscal year. So we do have a note here in the checklist as well, to make sure that they're in July, that's current, and then those reports get run. But again, it steps you through running those or creating those jobs in the job scheduler, so that they get sent to AOS, and the district can check that off of their fiscal year end checklist or to-do list. One thing that will be new, and I wanted to just point this out, is there will be a new GASB 101 report, and that will be coming out in the next release. So the 2025 .11.0 release, which should come out a week from now, next Friday. We're going to see another option available under those AOS reports. So it's going to be listed right under those two reports that we just pointed out, and it will be, as I mentioned, that GASB 101 report. So this report is kind of a subset of the other two auditor of state reports, but it's also going to include leave information. So this will gather all those accumulations and absences that is now being required. And then one thing that will not be included in this initial report release But our development team is aware of it and they're still working on that piece to try to figure out how they can make that happen, is adding the fund piece to the report. So I know that Mark has been working with the Auditor of State's office to try to, get everything incorporated in this report that's needed for that new reporting. So he's aware that, that part is missing and they're going to continue to try to figure out how that can be incorporated as well. But again, look for that new option to be available on the upcoming, 2025-11 release, which is scheduled for next Friday. So that will be out before fiscal year end happens. Okay. That is all I have for fiscal year end, and we are really pressing our luck on time. But the last sort of series of reports that I just want to point out, I'm sure everybody's aware of it, but I feel like there is some confusion out there as far as like, what report do I use for this third-party reporting? Everybody sort of uses different third parties, and I know that that can be confusing. So I just want to do real quickly talk through those different reports that are out there and what they're to be used for. So the first is the Afford report. Again, I'm sure everybody's aware of, what it's used for, but for those of you that aren't, this is used for your Affordable Care Act reporting. So those, that have exceeded 30 hours in a week or 130 hours in a month, where do I go to get that information to report that accordingly? You're going to want to use the Afford report. So that's going to give you all that information for your ACA reporting. The census report, that's used for the ING reporting. So for those districts that use ING as, an annuity company, a third party, they can run the census report in various different ways that they need to in order to create that extract file to then provide that information to ING. There's all kinds of reports out on our public shared USPS reports library when it comes to American Fidelity. So, go out there, use any of the reports in the report library that might be helpful when it comes to reporting information to American Fidelity. Now, we've gotten questions recently on when it comes to American Fidelity and some different kinds of reports that, I'm not sure what those might be, but it's almost like, I don't know if it's the common remitter piece that is being asked about. I just kind of wanted to throw it out there. Is there something that you guys are noticing when it comes to American Fidelity that maybe they've changed, or a report that's not out there that we should look into helping, that would be helpful if lots of you are getting asked for? Is there
Hey, Lori.
anything?
Hey, Lori.
Yes.
It's Vicky.
Yeah.
It was easier just to talk than to try and explain this.
Okay.
So my ticket with you with American Fidelity, we finally have figured out what
Okay.
they're doing, if this helps. So American Fidelity has figured out a way to connect their platform with our USPS. And they're they've done about 50 districts so far, and that is their goal, is everybody who has American Fidelity to kind of set this up so that every year when we do our open enrollment, we do not need to provide the
Okay.
normal information to them. They can just log in behind the scenes with their platform and grab that information.
Gotcha. Okay.
Um,
So it's for open enrollment. That's the,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, it's for open enrollment because we have to provide our employees' name, their position, their salary, their insurance information, what they
Sure.
pay, what the board pays. So when, however they're able to do it, it's called AF Bridge, but
Okay.
they have that system connect with ours, and then they're able to gather that information.
Okay. And that's when we helped create the user to
Yes,
so make
and
that connection and they can pull.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have not heard back that it hasn't worked.
Okay.
I'm sure
Good.
I will if it doesn't,
Sure.
but for that particular ticket that I had with you, I've set all of that up and relayed that information over to the district for them to relay it to American Fidelity.
Perfect.
So I'm
Okay.
sure if something goes awry that they'll be certain to let me know, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that's,
Absolutely.
that's the history behind that.
Perfect. Okay. I wasn't
Okay.
sure if there was some other piece that we were missing that would be helpful, if everybody's getting asked, the same for the same information, we could certainly try to be helpful in that way, but that makes sense. And I think others districts or other ITCs have set up that same sort of
Correct.
connection
Correct. That,
and
that
yep,
was just the first one for us.
sure,
So,
absolutely. Yep.
yeah.
Okay, perfect. That was helpful. Well, if there's
Okay.
something else that, we're missing when it comes to American Fidelity, because I know so many districts, do use them, please feel free to reach out and we'll try to be helpful, if there's something else that's, being requested a lot.
Thank you, Lori.
The last, sort of third party, not really third party, but report that we've been, getting some, um, questions on and, asking for assistance for is the OEWS report. And here's that template that districts receive, and I'm sure you guys have all seen this, and it's familiar to you. Hopefully you can see it. Okay. But it's asking, for job title, hourly rate, salary information, and then for educators, it's asking for, their full-time equivalency, grade level, special ed, FTE, the location, and so forth. So, we did discuss this week at our meeting with our development team, and we came up with a solution, if you will. It's not perfect, because there's not really a way to get everything in one report, that's being asked for. But we have out here, again, in the reports library, two different report definitions that we've, um, linked here that can be downloaded. One is like the compensations paid, because that's the messy part. In my opinion, is that they ask districts to provide, or this report has to be generated based on a specific date. So, based on this date, who was included in that particular, who did you pay? Who was included in that payroll? So it's not a pay date, it's a date and then who was inclusive of that pay period. So you have to figure out then, okay, May 12th was inclusive of, this actual pay date. So we've created a report definition that will go out there and grab all of that information based on the history of that particular date. And then we also created another report definition that gives all the other information. So like, we're not going to have during the payroll, we're not going to have, the full-time equivalency, their annual salary, their grade level, special ed FTE. This is not captured during the payroll process. So this report definition here is going to give them all the other information. So I can show you here. This is what the compensations paid that looks like. What will have to be done then is using VLOOKUP. We're going to use the compensation ID, which is included in both of those report definitions, and we're going to merge them. So it's going to give you the ability to then get rid of anybody, that wasn't included in this particular payroll, and give you all the information then that's needed once those two reports are combined, that can then be used to enter the information that's being requested in that, OEWS report. So I did import both of those just so you can see them. Oops. Thought I had the other one open as well. Yeah, here it is. So you can see here that the other report is giving you all of the, the other information that's not included during the payroll process. And again, you can merge then those two reports into one based on the compensation ID. I did notice that we don't have the employee name. That probably would be helpful to add, just so that districts have the ID is not gonna mean anything to them. So I'm gonna get that added, and I'll update the report definition out here for you. So again, not the most perfect way to get the information, but again, it does give them some tools to get that information. We were trying to think of a way, to capture the information during the current payroll, which, from a backup or some sort of, copy of the files before the payroll was posted, and it just wasn't working the best. So using the history of the payroll, we can go out and grab that information. So that leads me to my very last kind of report creator tool. And Amanda touched on this a little bit during her session, and that is to actually use the Custom Grid Creator. So once you select that option, it gives you the ability to select a specific object. I use this a lot, actually. This is a way to look at the history and how it was, pulled into the payroll based on specific records, and it gives me, probably way more information than what I actually need to see. But I do have, usually everything that I need to see under the more option, and I can add that to my grid if need be. But a couple examples that I use frequently. One is the historical pay amount option. And what this is useful for is if districts reach out to you and they say somebody's taxes look way off, like last time it was this, and this time it's this, I don't understand why. My first guess is that the supplemental tax option got set. So this historical pay amount object will give you a way to look at, you can filter based on pay date, and I can go to the supplemental tax option and type, or sort that, bringing something other than none to the top. And it's going to give me a quick way to look at who may have been taxed, differently. So that's one example that's the Custom Grid Creator, can be used for. The other is the historical payroll item option. And I use this a lot for Medicare pickup problems. So if somebody's Medicare pickup didn't get set at the right time, you know, it gets, as we all know, it's very messy. I can go out here and I can, you know, filter the code based on Medicare, and I can see then what the gross and the applicable gross was, the amount for both the employee and the employer. And I can see then, you know, pull this into a spreadsheet and allow me to start here to know what I need to correct, the amount I need to correct. And I usually, you know, add columns. This is what the applicable gross was. This is what it should have been. This is what the employee paid. This is what's, you know, it should have been 0. This is what the employer paid. This is what it should have been. And it helps me then kind of put all those pieces together to know how much to refund the employee, the difference in the applicable gross and what the employer amount was, what it should have been, you know, and so it helps me add or create all of those necessary adjustments. So again, I use the custom grid creator all the time. Again, you know, not maybe for running reports per se to, you know, provide to the district, but it helps me in balancing issues and, you know, help them, so to speak. So go out here, use that custom grid reporter or creator, and, you know, maybe you'll find it just as useful as well. Okay. All right. That is all I have, and we are, you know, running way past our allotted time, and I apologize for that. Are there any questions about anything that we talked about when it comes to the payroll side of things and those payroll reports? Okay. I don't see anything in the chat, and I don't hear anybody having any questions. So again, thank you guys for your time today. I know it was a long session, and I appreciate you grinding through with us. We will be off when it comes to Fridays with Fiscal until about a month from now. We're gonna pick things back up on July 11th with the June release recap. So I want to wish all of you a wonderful fiscal year end. Hopefully that time, you know, goes very smoothly for all of us, and wish you all a very happy, wonderful weekend. And we'll talk to everybody soon. Thank you.